The air at the Chang International Circuit in Thailand doesn't just carry the heat of the tropical sun, it carries the weight of expectation. In the high-stakes theater of the MotoGP paddock, every movement is scrutinized, every lap time a judgment. But as the engines roared to life for the Thailand Grand Prix, something felt fundamentally wrong. For the fans lining the grandstands, the focus was on one man, Toprak Razgatlıoğlu. The Turkish Lightning, the man who had redefined what was possible on a superbike, was now deep into his transition to the pinnacle of prototype racing with the Prima Pramac Yamaha project. The hype surrounding his arrival had been staggering. For years, the paddock whispered about what Toprak could do on a Grand Prix machine. Now the world was watching. But as he rolled onto the back straight during the opening sessions, the explosive acceleration that had become his trademark was nowhere to be seen. Instead of a predator lunging for its prey, the Yamaha M1 looked sluggish, breathless, and strangely vulnerable. The whispers began almost immediately. Was the transition finally proving too much? Was the gap between production-based racing and the brutal world of MotoGP larger than even Toprak could bridge? The silence from the Yamaha garage was deafening. While the Ducatis and KTMs screamed past the speed traps, Toprak's bike seemed to be fighting an invisible anchor. No one inside the paddock expected what would unfold next, and the truth emerging from the telemetry would change the narrative of the entire season. Inside the Prima Pramac garage, the atmosphere was a sharp contrast to the humid chaos outside. Blue-shirted engineers stared intently at walls of monitors, their faces illuminated by the flickering glow of complex data streams. They were looking for a ghost. During the first free practice session, the numbers didn't add up. On paper, the Yamaha V4 was supposed to be a leap forward in power delivery, yet the telemetry was showing unusual power fluctuations that defied explanation. Initially, the senior management remained calm. In the world of modern MotoGP, performance is often a matter of software. The first assumption was a simple electronic mapping error. Perhaps the traction control was being too intrusive, or the anti-wheelie software was cutting power prematurely on the exit of Buriram's tight corners. They adjusted the parameters, remapped the engine, and sent Toprak back out. But as the session progressed, the frustration on Toprak's face became impossible to hide. He wasn't just fighting the bike, he was fighting a machine that seemed to have a mind of its own. One lap the acceleration was there, the next it vanished. It was a psychological nightmare for a rider who relies on millimetric precision. Behind that calm, focused expression, the pressure was building fast because the team was beginning to realize that the problem wasn't in the code. It was in the metal. To understand why this was so devastating, one must understand the anatomy of Toprak Razgatlioglu's riding style. He is a point-and-shoot specialist, a rider who uses violent late braking to square off a corner and then demands maximum immediate thrust to rocket toward the next apex. It is a style that places immense stress on the rear tire and the internal components of the engine. As the second practice session got underway, the ghost in the machine became a physical reality. Toprak was doing the impossible under braking, outperforming the likes of Marc Marquez and Pedro Acosta into the hairpins. He was gaining meters on the entry, risking a front-end tuck at every turn, but as he picked the bike up and twisted the throttle, the Yamaha refused to respond. The thrust he needed was replaced by a hollow drone. The telemetry now showed a consistent drop in power output, roughly several percent below the normal specifications. In a world where championships are won and lost by thousandths of a second, a 3 to 5% power loss is a death sentence. Toprak reported a strange sensation, a feeling that the bike was dragging a heavy weight. The team scrambled, changing gearbox ratios and trying to mask the deficit. Yet the real turning point happened away from the cameras, deep inside the engine's combustion chamber. The diagnostic process in a MotoGP garage is a race against time. Between sessions, every second is a commodity. As the mechanics stripped the fairings away, the lead engineers began a deep dive analysis of the internal pressure sensors. What they found sent a shockwave through the garage. This wasn't a software bug or a faulty sensor. One of the engine's critical internal components had suffered what engineers call micro-damage. This was a silent killer. The damage was so small it didn't cause a catastrophic failure or a plume of smoke, but it was significant enough to cause a loss of pressure in the combustion system. The engine was essentially leaking its own lifeblood, losing the vital compression needed to generate maximum horsepower. It was a severe setback that couldn't be fixed at the track. For Yamaha, the implications were staggering. This wasn't just a Toprak problem, it was a potential reliability crisis for the entire project. If the component had failed under the stresses of Toprak's aggressive style, was the design itself flawed? The team was now in a state of turmoil. They had to decide whether to risk running the engine for the race or sacrifice a fresh unit from Toprak's limited seasonal allocation. But the twist that followed would change the championship narrative entirely. Despite the internal chaos and the knowledge that his machine was crippled, Toprak lined up for the race with the grit of a champion. He knew he was walking into a gunfight with a broken blade. As the lights went out at the Chang International Circuit, the power deficit became painfully visible. On the long straights, the Ducatis of Jorge Martin and Marc Marquez didn't just pass him, they pulled away with an ease that looked almost insulting. What followed was a masterclass in defensive riding. Toprak was forced to find alternative lap time. If he couldn't beat them on the straights, he would have to outbrake them in every single corner. He was taking lines that defied physics, pushing the front Michelin tire to the absolute limit of its endurance. It was a high-wire act performed at 200 miles per hour. The media and the fans watched in awe as the crippled Yamaha held its own in the middle of a pack of far more powerful machines. Every time a rival like Pedro Acosta pulled alongside on the straight, Toprak would respond with a staggering display of late braking, reclaiming the position at the very last moment. But the strain was immense. He was fighting the bike, the heat, and the crushing expectation of a global audience. Yet, as the race reached its climax, the struggle was about to take an even more dramatic turn. When the checkered flag finally fell, Toprak had managed to bring the bike home in a position that no one thought possible given the technical data. He was exhausted, his leathers stained with the salt of a brutal physical effort. But as he rolled into the Parc Fermé, there were no celebrations in the Yamaha garage. The engineers moved in like surgeons, immediately shielding the bike from prying eyes. The post-race analysis was solemn. Once the engine was fully dismantled, the true extent of the microdamage was revealed. The internal components weren't just worn, they were on the verge of a total explosive collapse. Some mechanics claimed that if the race had lasted just 2 more laps, the engine would have seized, potentially leading to a dangerous high-speed incident on the main straight. The disputed advantage of the rival teams was now clear. It wasn't just better aerodynamics or electronics. It was the simple fact that their engines were functioning as designed. Toprak had been racing a ticking time bomb. The revelation sparked intense confrontation behind closed doors between the team management and the factory representatives. The question was simple: how did a brand new engine suffer such a critical failure in its first weekend? The fallout from the Thailand Grand Prix was immediate. In the days following the race, reports suggested that Yamaha was conducting an emergency evaluation of their entire engine package. The Turks' performance had been a miracle of rider skill over mechanical failure, but the paddock knew that miracles weren't a sustainable strategy for a world championship. The public narrative began to shift. The social media wars between fans, which had initially questioned Toprak's adaptation, were now filled with a new respect. Analysts who studied the race data concluded that Toprak's pace, even with a 5% power loss, was arguably the most impressive feat of the season. He had stayed within striking distance of the front group, while his bike was effectively gasping for air. But the heavy setback left a lingering shadow. Contract negotiations and team morale are built on trust in the machinery. Yamaha had to prove that this was an isolated incident of microdamage and not a fundamental flaw in the V4's DNA. As the team packed their crates for the next round, the weight of expectation had never been heavier. They had the rider, they had the talent, but did they have the reliability to survive the most competitive era in MotoGP history? As the dust settled on the Thailand Grand Prix, the MotoGP world was left with more questions than answers. Toprak Razgatlioglu had proven that his talent was staggering, and his ability to adapt was jaw-dropping, but the machine had failed the man. The Turkish Lightning had been grounded by a silent saboteur inside his own engine, yet he had refused to let it define his race. The tension heading into the next round is explosive. Yamaha has reportedly flown in fresh power units with upgraded internal specifications, but the psychological strain remains. In a sport where confidence is everything, Toprak now has to head into the fastest corners on the calendar, wondering if the ghost in the telemetry will return. Rumors suggest deeper tension behind closed doors at Pramac. They didn't move to Yamaha to fight for scraps, they moved to win. The 2026 season is reaching a fever pitch, and the battle for technical supremacy is just as fierce as the battle on the asphalt. Toprak is ready to strike, his braking is sharper than ever, and his hunger is undeniable. But what the paddock discovered next shocked everyone, and it would ensure that the next time the lights go out, the entire world will be holding its breath.